This episode of The Framework is brought to you by the City of Detroit's Planning and Development Department. Hey everyone, this is your friendly neighborhood city planner Rashid Hassan Deepan. Welcome to episode 2 of the Framework podcast. Our guest today is Rashard Dobbins. Rashard has over 10 years of experience working as a performer and production professional in the entertainment industry. He has worked on projects such as The Walking Dead, The Hunger Games Mockingjay, All Eyez On Me, and The Internship. He has also served as a liaison for a leading talent agency specializing in cultivating talented youth. Some of his highlights include being a Class 2 Fellow of the WKKF Community Leadership Network with the Center for Creative Leadership, Deli Spring 2020 Cohort Participant, and a panelist for various youth organizations. In this episode, we learn about his work through Class Act Detroit in the Midwes-Tireman community. The mission of this nonprofit organization is to empower youth via music and arts education in Detroit. The purpose is to promote equity and racial healing and build a community for future generations via elements of hip-hop. We also hear his thoughts on how to engage people, especially the youth, in the overall framework process. It's always a pleasure talking to Rashard and hear the enthusiasm and passion he brings to working with the young scholars, as he describes them, and tapping to their creative potential. This is me talking to Rashard Dobbins. All right, Mr. Rashard Dobbins, thank you for your time and taking time from your busy schedule to join us in today's episode of the Framework podcast. So one of the first questions that I ask my guest is, are you a resident in the neighborhood?
Absolutely.
Okay. Were you always a resident or did you move here?
So I moved here. I'm one of those unique individuals that's kind of nomadic. I'm able to typically relate to those that are considered Army brats or folks in the Air Force. I moved 1 to 2 times a year, completely between Greater and Metro Detroit and Greater and Metro Atlanta my entire life. So sometimes that was 1 to 2 times a year in between the two.
So where were you born?
So I was born in Southeast Michigan, in Ypsilanti. That's where I spent the largest amount of time. Where I didn't move like 1 or 2 times a year, pretty much to elementary. So I was there throughout my elementary years, but then right after that, moving all around. Thankfully, it brought me back home to Detroit, man.
So how did you find yourself coming back to the city of Detroit?
I mean, in a nutshell, like the true answer is destiny, man, my calling. When you move that much, you get a chance to see what's on this side of the tracks, what's on that side of the tracks, and in places that there aren't any tracks. And that's my true answer. But, I accepted a job. I'm an educator by trade. I also worked in the entertainment industry. And that's where my organization, Class Act Detroit, really combines the two. We're all about reaching and teaching scholars and, ensuring that education is culturally relevant and building community and all about equity. That's why we do it, racial healing. But got accepted to a position, was elated, right, to come back home, even though Atlanta's my second home, to come back home to serve in my community, where I'm from, in the truest sense, and to ensure that kids, in our inner city, in our urban core is getting what they need, man.
What is it specifically about Midwest-Tireman area that made you want to relocate here?
Midwest-Tireman, it's unlike any neighborhood I've been in. There's this unique mix of entrepreneurs, activists, artists, elders, and youth that really makes it a sweet spot. It's a place where there's a lot of challenges, but then you see the community that's held it down. There's generations after generation that have been invested in that community and allowing it to even be ripe for development or for new ideas or for old ideas and to return it back to its former glory. So I would say that's probably the biggest thing is the intergenerational capacity is unlike any other neighborhood. And then when you even talk about like an emerging arts center, I mean, we're not far from the Motown Museum. You have the Bluebird Inn that's being restored to its former glory. You know, you have House of Hip Hop, obviously Class A Detroit. You know, and all of these just other. You have the B Museum around the corner. You have just all of these things that are emerging or already exist, and together, I think we have the next movement on our hands.
So you mentioned that there are some challenges in the neighborhood. So in your opinion, what are some of the pressing issues in the neighborhood?
And I'll just say, not even just my opinion, but also mixed with us doing focus groups and surveys and lending it to our neighbors. Um, you know, we already know dumping is a thing, right? There's a lot of blight. House, field, house, plenty of that. You know, mobility, potholes, lighting, things that are unfortunately congruent with our city as a whole. It's a little bit extra in Midwest-Tireman. There's a need for pantries. There's a need for some parks. There's a need for a lot of these things. These are all things that we've heard. Ultimately, to put it all a pretty bow on it, right, it would be connectivity. We already know mobility is an issue in Detroit as a whole. And right now, Midwest-Tireman has the opportunity through arts and culture and through green infrastructure and improvements in public space to bring connection. You know, it's easy to call Detroit and say food deserts. It's more like a food apartheid, right? Like that's really what's going on. So that's there as well. You have things broken down like the Motown market and all that, and folks not really having what they need. I know personally from speaking with other organizers in the city and within the neighborhood adjacent to where we are in the number streets, you know, there's a need for like farmers markets and things that we're talking about doing and engagement with all of the historic churches in the area, which obviously I own one of them, or my organization owns one of them, I should say. But those are just some of the things that come off the top of my head from conversations even as recent as the last month.
So you kind of mentioned connectivity and mobility. Like, could you elaborate a little bit on that? What you meant was the key issue there?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, we gotta get rid of these potholes, right? That's one. But what you find when you dig into the treasure trove of our city's history is, you know, as much as we love the big three, public transportation was killed. So we have opportunities now to really rectify that, right? To change that dynamic through both green infrastructure and things like the upcoming Joe Louis Greenway that started in the Midwest-Tireman community. You know, bike paths, improving sidewalks, all of these wonderful things. But it's like, my thing is everybody wants to see that in their community. There's a reason why it has not happened in Midwest-Tireman prior to this time and other neighborhoods throughout our city, and let alone when we zoom out and look at the Midwest, right? When we look at funding, when we look at redlining. And so it's important that we bring that racial healing lens to what we're doing, that racial equity lens to what we're doing. And connectivity, whether through arts and culture, whether through green infrastructure, whether through sidewalks and bike trails and right, Joe Louis Greenway connections and nodes, all of that allows us to racially heal. So to me, the connectivity piece brings it all together. You know,
it's interesting because you're talking about connectivity, and as planners, when we talk about connectivity, it often comes in the form of infrastructure, right? Like physical intervention that connects things physically. But I find it interesting that you're also kind of thinking it not from that perspective, but from the arts and culture aspect of it. Speaking of Classic Detroit, can you tell us more about Classic Detroit and its mission statement?
Absolutely. We'd love to tell you about that. So I'm gonna give you a short answer and a long answer. The short, we're gonna start there. It's kids, community, and hip hop. Hip hop is a culture. It's different from just saying, for instance, rap. Rap is wrestling. Hip hop is kung fu, if you ask me, right? Not everybody would say that, but you know, rap is wrestling. You know, it makes sense for certain things. It's entertainment. It's this, is that. Hip hop is a full culture. It's a way of life. It's a language. It's a way of walking, talking, living. And what's so beautiful about it is this equity built into it. You know, last time I checked it in the South Bronx, August 11th, about 50 years ago now, almost technically 49 years ago, right? You have a back to school event that stamps full of people of color that launched this thing that brought all these elements together at, Sedgwick Avenue in the South Bronx. But it's an area that had its, dance classes taken away, their poetry classes taken away, instruments taken away. And then they say, cool, you take away my dance class, I do James Brown on the ground. You take away my trombone, my trumpet, that's cool. We're going to take this thing that plays pre-recorded music, the turntable, and I could put Miles Davis in my band. I'll be the band leader that way, right? I'm a hip hop version of a Duke Ellington. I get to play the arranger and be a scientist, right, and be a technician, a technical individual. Um, you take away my poetry class, and then I find a way to turn the speaker up to volume 10, even though it only goes to 8, and tell you exactly what's going on in my neighborhood, like a grill. You know what I'm saying? And tell you what's going on and make you feel it and make you hear it and change the world that way and through emceeing. So, we love hip hop because it was always so-called black and so-called brown folk, and I say that because those are Creole colors. But we know that those have turned into, when you say black culture, you're talking about a beautiful thing that loves and has went around the world a couple times and brings folks together. Let alone when we talk about places like, Hitsville, USA on West Grand, and our Motown model, where it's bringing folks together and it's creating business opportunities for folks and changing generations. But we love hip hop because it unites us. So I'll just start there. But our kids, community, and hip hop, that's what we do. It's all about reaching to teach. It's all about equity and racial healing. And, we started in the schools and day one. And later from the schools is after school program to a house. And then from a house to owning the house of worship. And the flawed thing about it is day one with kids as young as 7 and folks as young as 77, right? We're present at meetings, especially board meetings, and we literally would say, what do you want to do? So that's what brings us to owning, our headquarters on 28th Street and really hunkering down and being in the Midwes-Tireman neighborhood. It comes from us sitting down with kids, their guardians, their fathers, their mothers, their aunts, play uncles, their grandparents, and saying, yo, what do you want to do? And that's what brings us, to the area. But that's our motto, man. It's really
Right.
empowerment
Right.
for children as of color and communities of color to be able to racially heal and, have a platform, to have a speaker system that goes to volume 11 and a microphone, as many as we need for you to do exactly what it is. Our thing is not to have an army of kid DJs, although we have that. Our beat makers, we have that. Or dancers, we have an amazing step team. We got that too. My thing is be a lawyer who does murals, be a nurse who is an MC, showing up and showing out, speaking about things that are relevant to you as a young woman, and having your voice heard and us respecting it and respecting your talent. Most of our young ladies that do that, not only can they MC or make a beat, but they want to start a label on top of that. And be an architect, right? So this is really just, it's all about healing. It's about being who you are and having a place to heal and grow and thrive, not just survive. That's really what we're about.
I know you mentioned that you really started with a simple house, the classic Detroit, and then over time, now you have the church. Can you say what the church name is?
St. Cyprian's Episcopal Church on 20th Street.
But what I was trying to say that while I understand that it started from a house and then, like you mentioned, to the house of worship, I'm curious to know how the idea of Classic Detroit came to exist.
Oh man, the seed for that? Oh man. How do I do it in a short way? Well, a couple reasons, man. As somebody who grew up moving 1 or 2 times a year, right? There's so many things that I wanted to do as a youngster and couldn't do. And right, because of my circumstances, another reason I care about equity and accessibility in particular, because that's something we really care about for our space, is my father was in a car accident. Like a couple months after I was born, was in a coma for a year, finally came out, but has lived in assisted living my whole life. So, it's me and mom through a lot. She was a young mother. I didn't really have my father in my life. My grandfather is the one that actually stood in and was that father figure for me, the only one I have, really, male figure, I should say. So, it starts there. It starts with me being a really talented kid that never had a platform for my expression.
Mm-hmm.
Later on, fast forward, you know, to about junior year, senior year of high school, my family didn't move that year. So I got a chance to go to the same school the next year.
Right.
Next thing I know, my grades jumped from like pretty much terrible, right? Or barely passing to like A's and B's. I
Yep.
started becoming a better, really like B's. I'm like, wait a second
I
now.
mean,
Okay,
you're talking to the choir right now,
there you go.
basically. Same story.
Right?
Yep.
There you go. And like, I didn't even know I had all these different gifts. Like, I could act, I could dance, I could sing. I'm a creative. Just going through that, learning my gifts much later in life, right? Not at 7 and 8, but closer to 18, if not 18, learning I could play guitar, learning I could DJ a little bit and things like that. And that I've always been those things. I think
Yep.
that's important. When you talk about calling, it calls you, it draws you in. And the pager, the text message, the phone calls, it's always coming in throughout your entire life. You just have to be in a position to like answer it. And it's always there. But you have to have a platform for it. You have to have femtors and mentors that are willing to be like, yo, have you considered this? Or let me stand beside you. Fast forward, I learned I have these gifts, these talents that I had no idea about. I then become a talent agent and working in, entertainment industry, behind the camera, in front of the camera, as well as being, management agent. And then I become an educator.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm in communities, working in communities that I grew up in, because I grew up everywhere. And I'm seeing scholars that, kids at 7 and 8 that are the same or even more talented than the kids I was helping to put in TV shows and feature films that everybody knows their name and their likeness. And I was like, yo, what's going on? And I think when something bothers you enough, it's on you to do it, right? You're uniquely qualified for your calling. So
Mm-hmm.
for me, working with scholars at 8 and 9, there's singers, there's rappers, there's musicians here, there's actors here, and I'm uniquely qualified to be able to assist. I mean, we went from grassroots in a house that was just under 1,300 square feet to
Right.
owning a property that's over 13,000 square feet. That's tenfold. So
Yep.
you need that platform, and that's what Class Act is about. From day one, it's power to the people, and it's starting with not the future, but the now. That's our seeds. Typically, we say kids are the future. That's not true. They're the now. They're literally the the seeds and the fruit of tomorrow and today.
Speaking of which, can you mention some of the programs that you have that help young scholars tap into
Yeah,
their creative potential?
all day, man. We have a regular music production and DJing course, podcasting. We have a community dance team that's absolute fire. They're amazing. They're amazing. We do game design. Anything that we do is within the elements of hip hop. So, we have scholars that have created music for the Library of Congress. We've done podcasts with Lyft and Hulu, right? I mean, just amazing things that our kids have
Mm-hmm.
been exposed to day one, out the gate, not later.
So, Rashard, one of the reasons we invited you to the Framework podcast is because of not only being a stakeholder in the community, but also, obviously with your work with Class Act Detroit and how it engages with the youth in the neighborhood. One of the goals of the community engagement process for the framework is youth engagement. As you know, we did the Build a Neighborhood activity in our second open house to gather youth feedback on their neighborhood. Now, because of your experience working with young minds, I'm curious to know your thoughts on how we can get them more involved in the neighborhood framework process. What steps can we take to ensure that their voices are heard and documented?
Heard and documented. Wow. Okay. Um, you know, the easiest way to do that is to ensure that they have you, seat at the table is really an understatement, because sometimes when we're talking about boardrooms and tables and seats at tables, typically that means that there's folks that's already at the table. But when you build that table, you build those chairs with the community, it's a whole different story.
Mm.
And it's really important that we approach it that way, especially when you think about along the lines of DEI and racial equity and things. It's one thing to bring up bar stools and foldable chairs to a conference table with really nice bolted down chairs. And it's another thing to like have these little kiddie chairs that you're bringing up for children sometimes, or for our OGs in the community, or for whatever it is, right? Whatever we're saying is the folks that we don't have at the table. It's important to build the table and the chairs with that community. So when you give the pad and the pen to the architects and the landscape and interior designers of the future, right? Our kids and their guardians and their grandparents and aunties and uncles and play cousins, it gets better and better because now everybody has a voice. And it's on us. Yes, it takes a little bit more time than just barging into a place and saying, hey, I know what y'all need. Y'all need a food pantry. Well, that community might say, well, we have this food pantry here and here. This church does this on Tuesday. We need a park. We've been working towards that for the last 10 years, and y'all haven't listened.
So, as you engage with young scholars, what steps did you take to really listen to them and understand what they needed to develop their own skills? Like, what were the methods that were used?
Man, so we found it in a house in the Bagley Fitzgerald neighborhood, 6 Mile, 7 Mile, West Nichols area, and did really what I'm talking about, man. We sat with our tribe. We broke bread.
Mm-hmm.
We had folks. It's intergenerational. Typically, our scholars would lead our board meetings. They were planning things that have now become the fruit of today. So in that same house, that duplex that was just under 1,300 square feet, was where the blueprints were drawn with children and their guardians and their relatives and with their family, because family and relatives is different. That's the strength of what we did, but we broke bread. We used arts and culture. We used hip hop because that's what it is, a culture, a common language between communities of color. We were engaged in the 5 senses and did it like that, man.
So I know you have a busy schedule, so I'm going to follow up with a few rapid fire questions because I really want to hear your thought on it. So, okay, here it goes. If there's one thing that you would like to see change in the neighborhood and be addressed in the framework, what would it be?
Okay. I'm going to come back to that one. We're going to close with that one.
Okay. If there's anything specific about the neighborhood that you would like the audience to know that generally we would not know about?
I would just say you sleeping on it. I mean, I love Southwest so much. Southwest has got this amazing community, right? It's equidistant to most of the neighborhoods that people love. But for whatever reason, they sleep on specifically the Midwest-Tireman neighborhood. It's by Northwest Goldberg. It's by this, it's by that. And it's like, yo, all of those neighborhoods are fire. Most people know about them. So if you're sleeping on Midwest-Tireman, it's weird because you fall in love with the neighborhoods around it, but you were sleeping on this one. I could name names. I could get real specific with people and businesses and all that, and activists and generations that's been there, musicians. I'm not gonna do that. Stop sleeping. Go read your books on the Old West Side. And learn. But it's not gonna be a secret anymore.
Gotcha. So since you've attended some of the community engagement meetings we have had so far, what do you hope to get in terms of outcome from this framework?
Partnership and real relationship. It's not enough to just do things anymore, right? If you didn't know that before 2020, I think 2020, 2021 showed us the power of community and the ills of our society. People of color are the majority now, right? Especially in this nation. If you're not listening to the scholars, you just shot yourself in the foot. So now is the time to empower the scholars, to listen to communities of color, and to empower them to do what they need to do. There's no shortage of talent in Detroit, in Southeast Michigan, in Midwest-Tireman specifically.
Going back to that question that I asked, if there's one thing you would like to see change in the neighborhood and be addressed in the framework, what would it be?
Power to the people. That's how you ensure that this is done right. Power to the people, listening, giving the pen and the pad and the tools to the community that already exists, and watch what happens. Get designers in the room with folks that design, because the real designers are the folks that grow up on the number streets, grow up on McGraw, grow up on Tireman. Those are the designers. Those are the architects that already are from there. Those are the artists and activists and the entrepreneurs that are already there. Let's listen to them. Let's prioritize all age ranges. Let's prioritize racial healing, and that's what it's gonna do. But I want to see us break through on this food apartheid that's going on, right? No more deserts. I want to see more arts and culture. Obviously, I run a cultural organization, and we're doing this work. Partner with us to do it, but let's partner with others, right? I'm not the only one. I can list a full name. We have these historic churches, right, where we're able to do food and pantries and farmers markets and all this great stuff. Let's listen to the tribe, and let's work as a tribe to get stuff done. That's what I want to see done.
All right. So my final question to you, if you had to describe Midwest-Tireman as a song, what would it be?
Oh, that's cold, bro. Flowers. It's a song named Flowers. I believe it's technically like the Yancey Boys, so it's a Dilla song. I'm a Dilla head. I'm a hip hop head, period, if y'all don't know this already. And can't tell. I would say that just because Midwest-Tireman is a big, huge garden to me, man. And it's not just because it's a bunch of vacant land. You know what I'm saying? Because we're like partnering with our neighbors to actually build one. Like it's a garden, it's the garden. And specifically for me, as a man of faith too, right? I think about the children of Israel. And there's this promised land that they were getting to. And a lot of the old heads didn't make it, right? They saw it, but they didn't really experience it. And the young ones did. I think now is the time for us to all get our foot out of our mouths and for us all as a tribe to experience that promised land. And Midwest-Tireman is that. I want to see more of that. So I'm going to say Flowers, man. I think that's the name of the joint.
I'm going to listen to it after we're done with this recording. Yeah. Rashard, thank you for your time, man. I really appreciate it. And I really appreciate you sharing your thoughts on the community and Detroit. Where can people find you on the internet?
class@detroit.org. At Class at Detroit on any social media. That's class like classroom, act, ACT like an actor, and then Detroit, Detroit, the wonderful city that we all live in, right? Holla at us, DM us, email us, Rashard at class@detroit.org if you want the email. It's game time, man. Let's get it.
Hey, Rashard, it's been a pleasure talking to you and getting to know you. This is Rashards Hassan Deepan signing off. Take care, Detroit. Thank you for listening. If you like this episode, please visit detroit.mi.gov/Midwest-Tireman and sign up for updates on the Neighborhood Framework, the latest podcast episodes, and upcoming community engagement meetings. You can also follow us on Instagram and Twitter @City of Detroit.